Most retirees spend years, sometimes decades, thinking about the number, the magic portfolio balance that will finally make retirement feel safe. They track their returns obsessively, rebalance quarterly, chase yield, debate funds, and measure their progress almost entirely in terms of how much their money grew. And while none of that is wrong exactly, it misses something fundamental about what retirement actually requires. Because the truth is, retirement success isn't really defined by returns. It's defined by stability, by durability, and by how much optionality you've managed to build into your plan before the paychecks stop. I've worked with enough retirees over the years to know that the ones who struggle aren't usually the ones with the smallest portfolios. They're the ones who retired without the right structural assets in place. Assets that don't show up on a brokerage statement, but determine almost everything about whether retirement feels calm and controlled or reactive and fragile. That's exactly what this video is about. 6 assets you should buy immediately once you retire, and why most people never think to build any of them. The first asset on the list is a personal liability umbrella policy, commonly called a PLUB. And I want to start here because it's the one that surprises people the most. It's not exciting, it's not a growth strategy, but it is one of the most important and most overlooked pieces of financial protection a retiree can have. And the fact that so few people have one is genuinely alarming when you think about what's actually at stake. Here's the core idea. By the time you retire, you've accumulated assets, a home probably, retirement accounts, maybe a brokerage account, maybe a rental property or vehicle or two. These are the things you spent your entire working life building, and they represent your financial independence for the next 30 or more years. But here's what most people don't think about. Accumulated assets also mean accumulated exposure. The more you own, the more you have to lose if someone decides to sue you. And people do sue. If you drive a car, you are liable for accidents. If you own a home that other people visit, you are liable for injuries on your property. If you have adult children who live with you or teenagers who occasionally borrow the car, you carry liability there too. A standard homeowner's or auto insurance policy covers you up to a point, but that point is often far lower than people assume. A serious accident, a major lawsuit, a judgment that goes against you, these can easily exceed the limits of a basic policy. And once those limits are exhausted, your personal assets become fair game. That's where a PLUP comes in. It sits on top of your existing coverage, like an extra layer of protection, kicking in once your underlying policy limits are reached. For a relatively small annual premium, often somewhere between $1 and $300, you can add $1 or even $2 million of additional coverage. That is an extraordinary amount of protection for an extraordinarily small cost, and when you frame it that way, the decision becomes almost obvious. Think about your home specifically. For many retirees, the home is their single largest asset. It's not just where they live, it's a contingency plan. Maybe the plan is to downsize eventually and use the equity to supplement retirement income. Maybe it's part of a long-term care strategy where the home gets exchanged for in-home care or a memory care facility when the time comes. Whatever role your home plays in your long-term financial picture, you need it to be there when you need it. A lawsuit that strips away your equity or forces a distressed sale doesn't just cost you money, it eliminates options you were counting on. An umbrella policy converts that catastrophic, unpredictable legal risk into a simple, fixed, predictable annual cost. You're paying a small amount to transfer a potentially enormous risk to an insurance company, and that is exactly what insurance is supposed to do. The second asset is something I call the missing middle, and once I explain it, you're going to wonder why nobody talks about it more. Most retirees operate with what amounts to a 2-bucket system. On one side, you have your traditional IRA or 401k, the account that functioned as your primary savings vehicle during your working years and now serves as your main income engine in retirement. Every dollar you pull from it is taxed as ordinary income, dollar for dollar, no exceptions. On the other side, you have your Roth IRA, the long-term growth engine, invested more aggressively, typically earmarked for later in retirement or for passing on to heirs. Both of these accounts serve important and distinct purposes, but what's missing for a surprisingly large number of retirees is the bucket in the middle, a taxable brokerage account. The reason this matters so much comes down to flexibility and tax efficiency. When you sell an investment inside a taxable brokerage account, you're generally only taxed on the gain, the difference between what you paid for it and what you sold it for, not on the full dollar amount of the withdrawal. And if you've held the investment for more than a year, that gain is taxed at long-term capital gains rates, which are almost always lower than ordinary income tax rates. Compare that to pulling money from a traditional IRA, where every single dollar you withdraw is treated as ordinary income and taxed accordingly. The brokerage account gives you a fundamentally different tax outcome for the same dollar amount, and that difference can be enormous depending on your situation. This makes the taxable brokerage account uniquely suited for large, irregular, one-time expenses, the kind that retirement tends to produce in abundance. A new car, a major home renovation, a bucket list trip, helping a child or grandchild with a down payment, medical expenses that exceed your budget. These are the purchases that can wreak havoc on a retirement plan if the only tool you have is a traditional IRA, because every dollar you pull is a taxable event that can push you into a higher bracket, trigger IRMA surcharges on your Medicare premiums, affect the taxation of your Social Security benefits, and create a cascade of unintended financial consequences. The brokerage account sidesteps much of that. It's not flashy, it doesn't get marketed the way IRAs and Roths do, but it is one of the most powerful and versatile assets in a well-constructed retirement plan. If you don't have one yet, and you're in the years leading up to retirement, this is exactly where excess cash should be going. The third asset is something I know you almost certainly already own, you just may not be using it correctly. I'm talking about Social Security, and specifically about the decision of when to claim it. Most people approach this question tactically. They do a break-even analysis, figure out approximately how long they'd need to live for delayed claiming to pay off, decide they'd rather have the money sooner, and file as early as they can. I understand the logic, but I think it misses the deeper purpose of what Social Security, especially a delayed Social Security benefit, actually represents. Every year that you wait to claim between your full retirement age and age 70, your benefit grows by approximately 8%. That growth is guaranteed. It's not subject to market fluctuation or interest rate risk. And on top of that guaranteed growth, your benefit is inflation adjusted for the rest of your life. In a world where genuinely more retirees are worried about inflation eroding their purchasing power over a 30-year retirement, that is an incredibly valuable feature. But here's the dimension that often gets overlooked entirely. The benefit you eventually claim becomes your survivor benefit. In a married couple, when one spouse dies, the surviving spouse keeps the larger of the two Social Security checks. That means if the higher-earning spouse delays until 70 and locks in the maximum possible benefit, the surviving spouse, who statistically will live alone for years or even decades after the first spouse dies, receives that larger, inflation-adjusted check for the rest of their life. Delaying Social Security for the higher earner isn't just an income optimization strategy, it is longevity insurance, it is survivor protection, it is a guaranteed inflation-adjusted income stream that grows every year you wait and lasts as long as you live. When you frame it that way, the question shifts from how quickly can I start collecting to how does this fit into the 30-year arc of my retirement and how do I coordinate it strategically with my portfolio withdrawals in the years before I claim. That is the right question, and the answer almost always points towards waiting longer than feels comfortable. The fourth asset is what I call the retirement runway, and this one might be the most important concept in this entire video for people who are right at the edge of retirement or recently retired. A retirement runway is not your emergency fund. You still need that, 3 to 6 months of expenses in cash as always. The retirement runway is something different and something additional. It's the deliberate, intentional setting aside of anywhere from 24 to 60 months of living expenses in stable, accessible, low volatility assets. specifically so that your lifestyle is never directly dependent on what the stock market is doing in any given quarter. The reason this matters so much, and why it matters in a way that it simply didn't while you were working, comes down to a concept called sequence of returns risk. When you're accumulating wealth, the order in which your returns arrive doesn't matter much. A bad year followed by good years produces roughly the same outcome as good years followed by a bad year, because you're always adding to the pile and time smooths everything out. But the moment you retire and start withdrawing from your portfolio, the math changes completely. Now the order of returns matters enormously. A major market downturn in the first 2 or 3 years of retirement can do catastrophic, irreversible damage to a portfolio, far more damage than the exact same downturn would have caused in year 15 or year 20. Why? Because you're withdrawing at depressed prices. You're selling low out of necessity, locking in losses that the portfolio may never fully recover from, and permanently reducing the base from which future growth compounds. Without something to bridge you through those down periods, you are forced to react. Markets drop, news turns frightening, and you have no choice but to keep pulling money from a portfolio that's already falling. That reactivity is catastrophic, and it's completely avoidable. A retirement runway breaks that cycle. When you have 2 to 5 years of spending in stable assets outside of your equity portfolio, you know exactly where every month's income is coming from, regardless of what markets are doing. You don't need to sell equities during a downturn because you're drawing from your runway instead. You give your stock portfolio time to recover. You make thoughtful, deliberate decisions about your plan rather than panicked, reactive ones. You sleep at night. That is not a small thing. The psychological stability that comes from a retirement runway is just as valuable as the financial stability, because the worst retirement decisions are almost always made in moments of fear. Remove the fear, and you remove most of the bad decisions with it. The fifth asset is one that almost never appears in a formal financial plan, and that absence is a real problem. I'm talking about aging-in-place upgrades. Strategic investments in your home that extend how long you can actually live there independently. If you know, or even strongly suspect, that your current home is the one you want to stay in for the long haul, then the time to start modifying it is now, while you're healthy, while you have the energy to manage a renovation, and while the work can be done thoughtfully rather than urgently. The kinds of modifications I'm talking about aren't necessarily dramatic or expensive. A curbless shower that eliminates the step-over threshold and reduces fall risk, lever-style door handles instead of round knobs, which are dramatically easier to operate for anyone with arthritis or reduced grip strength, reinforced grab bars in bathrooms, improved lighting throughout the home, particularly in hallways and stairwells, motion-activated lights that eliminate the need to fumble for a switch in the dark, moving laundry facilities from the basement to the main floor, widening doorways to accommodate a walker or wheelchair if that ever becomes necessary, reinforcing stair railings. These are not glamorous projects, but they are genuinely powerful ones, and the financial case for them is remarkably straightforward. Assisted living in the United States now costs an average of $4,000 to $6,000 per month, depending on location and level of care. That's $50,000 to $70,000 a year, potentially for many years. If spending $10,000 or $15,000 on thoughtful home modifications allows you to remain in your own home for even one additional year, the return on that investment is extraordinary by any measure. And that calculation doesn't even account for the profound personal preference most people have for staying in their own home, surrounded by their own things, in their own neighborhood, on their own schedule. The independence and dignity of staying home aren't just nice to have. They are genuinely part of what makes retirement feel like retirement, rather than managed decline. Every modification you make is buying more of that. The sixth and final asset is the one most commonly overlooked, possibly because it doesn't fit neatly into a financial planning framework, and that is your physical durability, your health span. Not your lifespan necessarily, but the length of time during which you remain physically capable, mobile, independent, and able to fully participate in the retirement you planned. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Muscle mass declines with age. There's a clinical term for it, sarcopenia, and it describes the gradual, progressive loss of skeletal muscle that begins in your 30s and accelerates significantly after 60. It affects everyone. It doesn't matter how healthy you are, how active you've been, or how good your genetics are. Without deliberate resistance training, you will lose muscle mass as you age. And that loss has profound consequences for your independence, your balance, your ability to recover from illness or injury, your cognitive function, and ultimately your quality of life. The research on this is not subtle or ambiguous. Loss of muscle mass is one of the single strongest predictors of loss of independence in older adults. It's connected to fall risk, to hospital readmission rates, to cognitive decline, to mortality. And the good news, genuinely good news, is that it is addressable. Resistance training works at any age. Studies have shown meaningful muscle preservation and even muscle gain in people well into their 70s and 80s who begin strength training. You don't need a commercial gym membership or a complicated program. A single kettlebell, a set of resistance bands, a weighted vest for walks, these are modest investments with outsized returns. A personal trainer, even for a few sessions to establish proper form and a sustainable routine, adds accountability and significantly reduces injury risk. And for those who want real data rather than guesswork, look into getting a DEXA scan or an in-body scan, body composition assessments that give you precise measurements of your lean muscle mass, bone density, and fat distribution. Many facilities offer these for $20 to $40 per session. Done once or twice a year, they tell you exactly how your body composition is changing over time and whether your exercise program is actually working. Maybe instead of losing 3% of your muscle mass annually, the average for a sedentary retiree, you lose 1% because you're training consistently and tracking the results. That difference, compounded over 10 or 15 years, is the difference between living independently in your own home and requiring assistance with basic daily activities. Invest in your health span and you extend your financial lifespan. Every year you remain healthy, mobile, and independent is a year your retirement portfolio doesn't have to fund a level of care you hadn't planned for. It is the most direct and personal investment you can make, and it is available to you starting today. Retirement success isn't about finding the perfect stock or timing the market or hitting some magic portfolio number. It's about building a plan that is stable enough to weather the inevitable storms, durable enough to last 30 years or more, and flexible enough to adapt as your life changes in ways you can't fully predict. These 6 assets, an umbrella policy, a taxable brokerage account, a delayed Social Security benefit, a retirement runway, aging in place upgrades, and an investment in your own physical durability, are the structural foundation of that kind of plan. None of them are glamorous. Most of them won't come up at a dinner party, but they are what the difference between a retirement that works and one that doesn't actually looks like in practice.